today we're going to look at the high-low method. This is a way that we can look at mixed cost and divide it into the variable cost and the fixed cost. We are going to start out with a problem that you have on your worksheet, and the problem states that Gina's gyms accumulated the following production and overhead cost data for the past 5 months. So we have our output levels for January through May. We also have our cost for January through May. And what we have to do with the high-low method is we are going to be looking at the high output level, and we also want to look at the low output level. So when I look at these amounts, the highest output that we have is January, and that is going to be 1,600 units. The lowest output that we have is going to be May, and that is at 1,000 units. So again, we are looking at these output amounts. We are not looking at cost with the high-low methods. We're looking at the highest output level and the lowest output level. Once we get these amounts, we will use the costs that are associated. So January is the highest output, so we will use the cost for January. May is the lowest output, so we will use the cost for May in our calculations. Now, the equations that we use to figure out variable cost and fixed cost, because remember, the numbers that we're given, like that 4,650, that is the total cost, and we want it split between variable cost and fixed cost. So one of the equations that we look at is that we can find fixed cost per unit by looking at the change in cost divided by that change in output or that change in units. Now, I do have delta. That triangle means delta. And whenever you see delta, that means change. So if you see that in the future, you'll know that's what we're looking at. So what we'll look at here is that change in cost. So for the change in cost, we are going to be looking at this 4,650 and the 4,050. Is what we will look at. So that is going to be $4,650 minus the 4,050. So that's the change in cost. Then we're going to look at the change in units. So 1,600 units is what went with the 4,650. 1,000 units went with the 4,050. So that's how we will correspond those items. When we do the math, what we find is we will have 600 divided by 600 in this case. And what that is going to give us is $1 per unit. So that is our variable cost. Our variable cost is $1 per unit. Now the other thing that we know is we have our mixed cost. Our mixed cost also can be called total cost. So when we look at our total cost, that is going to be our variable cost plus our fixed cost. Well, we know in this equation what our total cost is, and we know what our variable cost is per unit. So we're looking for fixed cost. And so we can do algebra, and when we do our algebra, what we find is that our fixed cost is equal to our total cost minus our variable cost. So what we can do is we can take either the high or the low, and we'll get the same answer. So if I choose to take the high, the total cost for that high was at 4,650. We have a variable cost that is at $1 per unit, and high produced 1,600 units. So what I would take is the 4,650 minus 1,600, and this is going to give me a fixed cost of $3,050. Now this was using the high amounts. I can also use the low amounts and get the same thing, because if I used my low amounts, the total cost was $4,050, $1 per unit, and I had 1,000 units. So what I would have would be 4,050 minus 1,000, and therefore that would give me the 3,050, and that is using the low method. So I can use the low or the high, but I have to use one or the other. I can't use anything in between. It has to be the high amount or it has to be the low amount to make this work. So my equation that I would have for total cost would then be my fixed cost amount, which I found to be $3,050, plus my variable cost, which is $1 per unit. So I'm going to put an X there for the actual units. And so that would be the equation that I would use to find total cost. Now, if I actually produced 1,700 units and I wanted to know what is the total cost, what I would do here is I would substitute it into this equation, and so my total cost would be equal to that $3,050 fixed cost plus $1 per unit. If I have 1,700 units, then multiply it by 1,700, so I would have 3,050. Remember, fixed cost plus the 1,700 variable cost, and what I would end up here would be $4,750. So that would be the total cost in this particular problem that I could assume that I would have. So this is using that high-low method. It was problem number 2 on your worksheet. You do have to know how to do all of this for your test, so make sure you go through, you work the worksheet, and you understand where all of this information is coming from.